Hello everyone, this is Kirya Does Things. I'm Kirya and today we are going to talk about the Bahrain Grand Prix and the individual performances of the drivers. I'm going to rate them out of 10 and I will try to take machinery out of the equation, so to try to rate their performance as drivers and only as drivers. Obviously, because it was the first race of the season, we don't have much data about each team's performance. So, based on that, my ratings are a lot of them close to 5, because I can't really give them very high or very low grades due to these unknown factors. Okay, so also I am quite late because today is Friday and it's the qualifying for the next race, but it's okay. Let's start with Alex Albon. I'm going to show the drivers in alphabetical order, so we will start each time with Alex. Now, Alex qualified P13, he finished 15th, and I will give him a basic grade of 5 out of 10. He outqualified Logan Sargent, which is a pretty easy thing to do. And in the race, both Williams had a lot of issues, so I don't think we can really grade the Williams drivers easily. And based on the fact that Albon outqualified Sargent pretty easily, I think he can get a 5 out of 10, even though he lost a couple of places in the race. So that's the first grade. The second driver is Fernando Alonso, who qualified a pretty remarkable P6 in the Aston Martin, and in the race he fell down into 9th place. The Aston Martin was the 5th fastest car, and it was pretty obvious based on the fact that they finished 9th and 10th. And it didn't really matter what Alonso would do. I mean, they don't have the pace of the McLarens and the Mercedes. So he kind of did the best he could, and Aston Martin is probably one of the teams that we have a basic understanding of where they are at, and so I gave him a 6 out of 10. The third driver is Valtteri Bottas, who qualified P16, one a spot ahead of his teammate, and in the race everything wrong that could happen happened to Valtteri, and he finished P19. So I think he's pretty ungradable. He couldn't really avoid Stroll in the turn 1 incident, not his fault, and then the 52-second pit stop was obviously not his fault. So we don't really know what he could do in normal circumstances. He outqualified Zhou, even though it was about 0.1 second or something. He still did it, so I think he's pretty ungradable, and I will give him a basic 5 out of 10 as well. Pierre Gasly, the Alpines are also quite hard to grade, the drivers. The Alpine seems like a terrible car right now. He qualified last. He finished behind his teammate. He only beat in the race the two drivers that had all the problems, Bottas and Sargent. I could give him a 5, but I think based on the fact that he was behind his teammate in both quali and the race, and he was like last in both of them, to be honest. He was last in quali and he was practically last in the race, so I will give him a 4 out of 10. However, I think he couldn't really do much more. Maybe just beat his teammate to get a 5 or something. The next driver is Lewis Hamilton, who didn't have a very good qualifying. He qualified 9th, quite far behind his teammate. However, the gaps were very small from 2nd to 9th I think, in quali. And in the race he had a decent pace, even though Mercedes had a lot of problems as well. He managed to beat Alonso and Piastri in the McLaren, so I think a 6 out of 10 is fair enough for Lewis. Next up we have Nico Hülkenberg, who was disappointing. He qualified 10th, which was really impressive. And I think if he didn't crash, he could get a point instead of Stroll. But he did crash, and it was his fault. And even though I am impressed with his quali pace again, I will give him a 4 out of 10 because of his crash and his mistake. Next up we have Charles Leclerc, who was, as usual, very good in qualifying. He was second. He finished the race in 4th after a lot of brake issues. He was locking up like crazy all the first half of the race mainly. And so his race is kinda ungradable. I can't really say what he could have done. Maybe he could have finished ahead of Perez in second if the car was working correctly, but we don't know. So based on the qualifying mainly, I will give him a 7 out of 10 because he did well enough. Next up we have Kevin Magnussen. He had a not very good qualifying. He said it himself that he was disappointed with P15 in quali. And he had an okay race. He ended up P12. Now, Haas last year was terrible in the races. They were terrible in tire wear. But this season they seemed like they are better. We're not really sure. But they started the season well enough. They showed that they have some pace. They can fight with the rest of the, let's call it midfield. By the way, I don't really think it's midfield. We keep saying it's midfield. They are the 5 worst teams. They are split into 2 groups, the 5 best teams and the 5 worst teams. And I don't really think we can say they are midfield. They are fighting between the midfield and the back markers, I would say. So he finished P12 mainly because he didn't run into trouble. So he beat his teammate who crashed. He beat Albon, who had problems. He beat the RBs, who they seemed not to have very good pace. He did well, but he didn't do crazy well. I think he did okay enough to get a P12 and a 6 out of 10 from me. Next up we have Lando, qualified 7th, finished the race in 6th. So he only overtook Fernando Alonso. A pretty lonely race for Norris. He did the bare minimum, I would say. He did decent, but nothing impressive. Not that he could do anything impressive based on the McLaren's race pace, but I can't really give him points because he didn't have an opportunity, and maybe if he had the opportunity to do better, he would do better. And so, as I said, the grades mainly on this first race will be around 5. So I gave him a +1 because he finished in 6th, which is decent enough. And he beat his teammate, obviously. So a 6 out of 10 for Lando. Then we have Esteban Ocon. I talked a little bit about him before with Gasly. Alpine is terrible, but he did manage to beat his teammate, so I will give him at least the basic 5 out of 10. We have Checo Perez. I don't think he did well, even though not everyone, but a lot of people think that it was a great drive. Don't really think finishing like 20 plus seconds behind your teammate is a good drive, but okay. He qualified 5th, which is not good enough in a Red Bull, obviously. And then he recovered, let's say, to 2nd. very close to Carlos Sainz, who was third. He can't get more than a 6 by me. A 6 is okay, I think. Maybe I could even give him like a 5. I don't understand why he should get a lot of a big grade for this race. He did what he's supposed to do and didn't impress, didn't do anything interesting. Red Bull obviously has very good race pace. Max showed it. So he just did like a basic okay race. Like his race, uh, that's why him and Hamilton have the same grade. I think his race and Hamilton's race were quite similar. Like they qualified not well compared to their teammates and to the machine that they have, and then recovered to some to a position that is more close to the performance of the car. So and Lewis was closer to Russell, way closer. Perez was nowhere close, so I don't understand why he should get any more than a 6 out of 10. Piastri was quite mediocre, I think. 8th qualified, finished 8th. So he got one position from Alonso, who, as we said before, didn't have good pace. I think because the Aston Martin didn't have good pace. And he lost a position to Hamilton. Part of it was his pace was not amazing, and part of it was a mistake from McLaren, I think, with a pit stop and the fact that they let Hamilton undercut him. So just a basic 5 out of 10. He was there, he did the bare minimum, he got the points that he should get. He was like, if he'd finished like 9th or 10th, he would be, it would be a disappointing race for him. Now it's just an okay, whatever race, I think. So he gets a 5 out of 10. And let's see what McLaren can do in the next race. Next up we have Danny Rick. Didn't qualify very well, 3 places behind his teammate. In the race he beat him, but we had all this drama. He had a better strategy, maybe a little bit of better race pace anyway. And then RB told Tsunoda to let him by in order to chase Magnussen in P12. They had a little bit of a disagreement. It took them like 2 laps to switch. Then he couldn't get Magnussen. I think in the end of the race they should have swapped them back because it didn't really matter and Tsunoda was actually ahead in the race. So I think he finished 13th and Tsunoda 14th, but it should have been the other way around. It's not fair to say that he beat his teammate in the race. So he did just nothing impressive, just a 5 out of 10. Next we have George Russell, who had an amazing qualifying. He was 3rd, and then he fell to 5th place, also with problems with the Mercedes power unit. Generally speaking, the Mercedes power unit doesn't seem very good with reliability. A lot of problems with Williams, a lot of problems with Mercedes. I'm pretty sure McLaren, I think Lando's car already has, they took already a second part of the engine, so they might have penalties soon, which is pretty, like, we just started the season, so generally speaking, not impressed with that. So Russell had problems, and at the start of the race, he got up to P2, I think. He overtook Charles, didn't he? Yeah, and then he fell back again with all the problems. He did pretty well, qualified well, did the best he could, so he gets a 7 out of 10 in this rating. Next we have Carlos Sainz, who was the driver of the day. Obviously the guys that get the driver of the day are not the guys that had the best race necessarily. He was up there, he was probably the most impressive guy after Verstappen, but nobody will actually vote for the guy who was the best on track. Now Carlos had a really good race, really strong race. Qualified behind his teammate and even Russell though. And one of the main reasons that he actually finished third and not lower was Russell's and Leclerc's problems. The thing that was impressive about Carlos was not the finishing third part, but probably the moves he made, the overtakes, and especially the dive bomb on Leclerc. So he had a good race. He was somewhat fortunate with the problems of the others, and I understand why the race was quite boring. Okay, so I understand why he was the driver that impressed the voters the most. I understand why he was driver of the day, but I think 8 out of 10 is a pretty reasonable grade. I don't think I can give him any more than that. Maybe he could get like a 9 or a 10 if he challenged and overtook Perez. But other than that, he was about where I expect him to be based on the fact that Leclerc and Russell had problems. And again, we don't really know Ferrari's race pace because one of the two Ferraris had a lot of problems, so we don't really know. But a very good drive from Carlos. After that, we have Sargent, who it seems like he was terrible. He was not completely terrible. Sorry, he wasn't good. He qualified 18th. Well behind his teammate, of course, classic Sargent. And in the race, he benefited at the start with all the chaos. He was, I think, P15 or 14 after the first lap. So he was running around there, and then his car decided to stop. So it wasn't his fault at all. But so his race is not very. I can't really grade the race. But the qualifying was not good, so he gets a 4 out of 10. After that, we have Lance, who had probably the most interesting race. He qualified P12, which was not very good. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't very good. He should be in Q3 a lot of the times. And he got tagged by Hülkenberg at turn 1. He was last. He pitted, I think. Probably. I'm not sure if he pitted actually at the first lap, but he used Aston Martin's race pace very well. They had a good strategy. He undercut a lot of people, and he ended up getting a point at the end. Part of it was the race pace of the Aston Martin. Part of it was his job. I think he did pretty well. But also again, I can't really give him like much more than a 7 when he didn't have a very good qualifying. So that's his fault. And then he got a point. Good recovery drive, not his fault. But I don't think I can give him like extremely good grades. I can give him a very good grade, like an 8 or a 9, if he qualifies like, I don't know, 6th and finishes like 5th in an Aston Martin. Then I can go like, yeah, he deserves like a 9. I don't think I can give him a 9 just because he was unlucky and then he got back to a decent P10 and he didn't qualify very well. So I think a 7 is fair enough for him. After that, we have Yuki. I gave Yuki the same grade as Danny Rick because I think he was a little bit better in the quali. He was a little bit worse in race pace. And then we had all the controversy. I think it should count like he finished ahead of Danny Rick. So they did pretty meh, both of them. So I gave him a 5 as well. Max obviously gets a 10. He qualified first. He led every lap. He had fastest lap. He won the race by 20 something seconds. I'm not gonna give him a 10 out of 10 for every race he wins, because he is in the best car, even if we say that it's a combination of, obviously, it's a combination of a very good car in the hands of a extremely good driver, and they work well together. But he absolutely dominated like everything in the first race. I can't give him lower than a 10 when he does all that. Like, again, Paul led every lap, fastest lap, won the race by 20 something seconds. Like, I can't. And Perez had no problems. It's not like he won by 20 something seconds because his rival, let's say, had problems. It wasn't that. He just obliterated him. So he gets a 10 out of 10, and obviously he was the driver of the day, even though it's boring. And last but not least, we have Joe. A decent drive, bad qualifying. Not really bad, actually. I don't really know. We don't really know if it was not very good qualifying or not. Sauber seemed like they had decent race pace, but not that great quali pace. He qualified behind his teammate, so we don't really know what Bottas could do without all the problems that weren't his fault. So we don't really know if that was Joe's performance in the race to finish P11, or it was Sauber's race pace and or strategy. We don't really have anything to compare to. If Bottas was fine in the race and he finished like P16 or P15, I would say yes, Joe here had an amazing race. He deserves an 8, maybe even more. But we have no idea. Maybe Bottas could score a point. Maybe Sauber is very good at race pace. I don't know. He did well, but we don't really know. We can't really compare him to Bottas. He got out qualified by Bottas. It was a fine race, and his race seems very similar to me to Stroll, if we don't count the part that Stroll had the accident that wasn't his fault. Other than that, I think both had an okay race. They both get a 7 out of 10 from me. I can't give them more based on the facts that we have in front of us. So that was it for today. I will try to have the ratings of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix ready much earlier. Obviously, this is quite late, but that's it from me. I hope you liked the video, and you can, if you liked it, you can like it, in YouTube. And we will probably talk again when the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix ends. Not sure if it's going to be an F1 fantasy video or an F1 video, but yeah. So see you in the next one. Bye.